But I'm going to get started. Thank you for coming. The intent of tonight is to be a little more nonpartisan, non-biased, if we will, and kind of talking about having conversations across the political line. So I know that's really hard this day and age. There's a lot of divisiveness from the top, unfortunately. So that means we have to work even harder to have these conversations that a lot of people don't necessarily seek out to have. So I entitled it, obviously, Building Bridges Beyond Political Bias, because that's really what we're here to do. Hi, I'm Jess Anderson. If you don't already know me, I'm pretty sure everyone in the room knows me. Ran for House of Delegates last year. We'll be running again next year. Right now we're focusing on this election, though, so that's what we're here to talk about, to have those conversations about this election. And yeah, so let's get started. Building bridges is the ability to have dialogue across political lines and is critical to moving forward as a community, a state, and a nation. So if we want to have these relationships and build upon these relationships, it starts local. It starts with the community of people. I know I have people in my wheelhouse that don't share my values or don't share my political perspectives, but I still think having those conversations is incredibly valuable because the reality is, as we'll see through these slides, there's ways that we can find common ground. So there's a difference between dialogue versus debate. I do a lot of debate personally online. If anybody follows me on social media, you might catch me doing a debate online. It is not as pleasant as dialogue. Dialogue is for the intent of actually listening and engaging and truly trying to hear what the other person has to say. So some points. Purpose is aims for mutual understanding and collaboration. The tone is collaborative, respectful, with an open mind. Focus is listening to hear and not to speak for the purpose of finding common ground. And the outcome may lead to consensus or new insights rather than a victory. This is not about winning. We're not going into a dialogue conversation for the purpose of, I beat you, I'm better than you. That's not the intent. Versus debate, which is what I like to do a lot because I like to debate, which aims to persuade with an argument, winning with an argument. Competitive and often can be confrontational. Presenting arguments and counter-arguments, often emphasizing the differences, and then outcome seeks to prove one side right and the other wrong. So you're walking away hoping that you are the winner, you're the victor. That is not a successful way to talk to people that are in our communities, in our house, our family, our friends, because the reality is we're just creating tension and they're not going to want to enter those conversations again. So in practice, both can play important roles, particularly in political discourse. We see our politicians having debates. We welcome them. We want to see where they stand, and debates really show that and highlight who they are, what their values are, what their policy will look like. But dialogue fosters understanding. And while debate can clarify positions, balancing the two can lead to more productive political conversations. Oh, we'll go back. So first and foremost, active listening. How many in here have a conversation and you're talking and you stop listening because you were just ready to respond to a fraction of what was said to you? I'm sure most are guilty of that. I certainly am. So focusing on truly hearing the other person's perspective without planning your response in advance. You're not listening to go, I heard this, I have a gotcha ready. I'm going to respond to that first part of your comment. You're listening to every element of the conversation. You're being quiet, you're engaging, you're nodding, you're making sure that the person you're speaking to recognizes that we're having a conversation and I care about what's coming out of your mouth right now. And this shows respect. It opens the door to more meaningful exchanges. And again, listening to hear, not listening to speak. I feel like that's a good way to learn and remember this key takeaway. Next is ask open-ended questions. Encourage exploration of ideas by asking questions that require more than a yes or no answer, okay? Because when we're talking to people, we have this habit of wanting to, again, it's this need to combat or be argumentative and get your point out quicker. And so sometimes you find yourself asking questions that simply end in a yes or no. This is very much a debate tactic I use quite frequently. I will ask a direct question because I want to know, where do you stand on this? So that I can combat that point. That's not what we're doing here in these type of conversations. We're asking questions that, again, what experiences led you to this belief? And I mean, here's a great example. Trying to think of a good one. The economy. So a lot of people have opinions on what the economy looks like, why the economy is the way it is. Ask them, what led you to feel this way about how the economy got to this point? Like, what is it that you personally experienced that said, well, I think this politician or this party does a better job, and here's why, and what I personally experienced. And sometimes when we're having debate, we really try to get away from the anecdotal evidence because at the end of the day, it is just your personal experience. But in this instance, that's not what it's about. This is about building relationships. So that means you have to get personal. It has to be about their personal experience and not simply demanding like a yes or no, or how did you get there? Why is that so important? You're wrong. It's talking to the person with the understanding that we realize our experiences in life are different, and many people base their ideology, their political views, all of those things on simply the experiences they're having. So this is an opportunity not only for you to hear their experience and how they got there, but to share your experience, give them some perspective on how you got to your personal opinion on political opinions or ideology, religion, the list goes on, because not only you're getting a chance to understand someone else's side, you're getting a chance to say it back to them, because if they feel respected, they're more willing to hear you out as well. So this is, again, opening the door. Find common values. And I'll have an example question next. But identify shared values or goals such as community, well-being, economic stability to build a foundation for understanding. At the end of the day, and I've discovered this a lot, especially last year when I'm outdoors, I'm talking to people that don't share my political values. Even in the debate sphere, I've discovered this. A lot of people have the same end-game goals. We just have very different means on how to get there. And I think that's true probably about anybody in this room. You all, for example, and here's my example. Raise your hand if you want our public schools to be successful and produce intelligent, contributing members of society. I really hope every hand goes up. Please, every hand go up. Okay. However, the way to get to this looks very different depending on your experiences, your political ideology, your home raising, all those things. And a lot of it strongly comes down to experience, which is why the previous slide is so critical when you start these conversations. So for me, these are the two responses you will get when it comes to the political wheelhouse. School vouchers versus funding public school. As someone who works in public school, you probably know where I land. But again, this is where we become very divisive on what we see as the right method to solve an issue. So for me, I work in the public school. I have public school parents. I'm a public school parent. I have public school children. So I would argue that I don't have the means and resources to send my children to private school. And I would be very concerned that if private school funding was being put into the pockets of other people to go to private school, that's taxpayer funds, we're disenfranchising children like my own that really don't have an opportunity to go to private school. We're disenfranchising other children that even with those vouchers still wouldn't have the means to transport their children, pay for meal costs, pay the difference of tuition. So that would be my argument. But there are people on the side of school vouchers who will make valid arguments about why they think that is the right choice. This is one of those things that I will probably never bend on. But again, this is a perfect example of we both believe, both sides of this argument believe they're trying to produce intelligent, successful students in the public school system, into the school system, to be, give back to the community in some way that's productive. But we have very different perspectives on how to do that. So it's recognizing that, again, this comes from personal experience, and you have to kind of talk through them. Say, hey, I get why you support that, but let's talk about why. Let's talk about the pros and the cons, and again, listening to one another and hearing to listen and not hearing to speak over them. And this is going to work, right? No. I stayed on that slide too long, and now it's mad at me. Okay. Stay calm and respectful. This one's hard for me sometimes. I can be a little passionate. People in this room know that I can be a little passionate. So maintaining a calm demeanor, showing respect to the person that you're speaking to, even when disagreements arise, which in these types of conversations, that is inevitable, avoiding inflammatory language and help keep the conversation productive, okay? You wanna keep saying, look, I know that we can't agree on this. And sometimes in these instances, on specific topics especially, you may have to say, you know what, on this, we're gonna have to take a pause. We're gonna have to walk away from this issue. Maybe there's something else we can talk about that maybe we can find common ground. And that's something you can do because one, it shows that you respect that person's opinion and where they stand on the issue, but you're also showing, I'm still willing to have more conversations, and that's gonna get that person willing to come back to the table again. And it's also gonna give them a chance that when you have this conversation, and this is what I find so important, and this is why I personally debate, I know every day I go into a debate online or in person, I'm not changing that person's mind. I don't ever go into a conversation thinking, I'm here to change that person's mind. I'm going into the conversation because the people listening, whether they be people that follow that individual or even follow me, might walk away with new information that they would have never had access to prior to hearing that conversation. And having that new information and going home and having to sit on it and think about it, including these conversations I'm inviting you to have, that is an opportunity for you to plant seeds. Oh, you know, she made a really good point about the school voucher thing and you know how it could be detrimental to certain students. Let me think about that. Let me do a little research. When you start to plant these seeds because the person you're engaging with is like, they weren't hostile, they didn't name call, they didn't demean me because my views weren't the same. They recognized that we weren't gonna agree on the issue and we moved on to a new one and we were able to walk away civilly and again, staying calm and respectful. You are gonna get more airtime with these people that you're trying to have these conversations with by just doing that. You don't have to walk away, again, changing their mind. You walk away knowing, hey, I've opened the door and they're willing to hear me in the future. And maybe this is an issue that we can talk about again in the future. So this is critical because respect is what we really need to be showing. Acknowledge differences. I know for me, and I'm sure many people in this room, I have a red line. There are certain issues that I will never bend on. For me, it's human rights. But I mean, I think that a lot of people view even the topic of human rights in a very different light depending on where they land politically. But while we recognize many of us have issues that are red line, we can recognize that differing opinions on many topics are still valid. Again, the people that are coming to you with opinions, and I'm gonna tell you 70% of American citizens sit on the fence somewhere. They've got left-leaning views, they've got right-leaning views. There are very few people that are far left and far right that we come in contact day in and day out. So these conversations are very much something that can be a reality for you. So knowing that there's gonna be issues like, and you can go into a conversation and say, this is one thing that I'm not gonna change my mind on. I would love to talk to you about other issues, but just know if we're gonna discuss this, this is my whole steadfast true. But let's find something that we can find common ground on, or that maybe we have a varying difference, and let's see where we can go with that. So acknowledging this difference can reduce defensiveness and create a more open dialogue. You're really creating an environment where, again, they're gonna be willing to come back to the table. I know for me, like I have a coffee with my mom every couple weeks, and we do not share the same political views. And we have a lot of really great conversations, and I personally have moved her on some of the issues. Not all the issues, but some of them, because of the fact that we're respectful, we care about one another, and we keep coming back to the table. So this is an opportunity for you to do the same for people in your life, wherever they are, and I think that's important. Share personal stories, and this kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier, but personal narratives can humanize issues and foster empathy. For me, anybody that kind of followed my campaign last year, and it's something that I'm very public about, I found myself on the other end of needing social programs when I got divorced initially back in 2014, 2015, and that was very personal to me, but it also opened my eyes to the system that is very much failing communities. And that personal experience has really given me the opportunity to talk from a firsthand perspective to people about, hey, fun fact, most people that are using social programs are not lazy at all. It's the fact that the system is set up that getting a little leg up, maybe that be a pay raise or a job change, literally could cause them to lose their housing, their food, all of their priorities overnight. And so when you know that that much is on the line, you're gonna be a little leery to leap and try to better yourself at your job or take that pay raise or get that promotion because the reality is they know what's on the line. And that's a very, in this time and age especially, when a lot of people are struggling just to pay paycheck to paycheck and do their bills and, go to the grocery store, go to the gas station, because even people on the left recognize things are expensive. It's the fact that this is something I can share to give people insight on another perspective of why, you've been taught or thought to think that certain people taking programs, they're just looking for handouts. This is a very common thing that I heard previously from being on the other end of that conversation. And so these types of conversations humanize the situation and make people realize, oh, well, I know her, and I know she works really hard, and she's super hyper. So obviously, so it's a great way to take something that you've experienced, and even sometimes personal experiences from people you know. It doesn't necessarily have to be your direct experience. And again, this is going back to being more anecdotal. That is what dialogue's about versus debate. You're really talking from a firsthand account, like, this is why I feel the way I do. And if you experience this, would you feel differently? And that's a way you can present it. If you went through this, would that change your perspective on how you present or talk about this particular issue? And that's a good way to get your foot in the door when it comes to trying to move people or just help them better understand your perspective. Focus on solutions. This one I think is, again, it can be a hit or miss because you are, again, not trying to change minds, but shifting the conversation towards finding solutions rather than winning an argument, and being collaborative. This is something that our government used to do. Big fan of that back when it happened, versus the partisanship that we see a lot more nowadays. But it's what you're doing. It's finding common ground in the sense that, hey, I recognize you feel this way about this, and I feel this way about this. Where's a place that we can kind of meet in the middle and say, okay, and again, there's some issues that are redlined for you, but there's a lot of issues that you can find some gray space to come together on. So kind of, this says create a sense of teamwork, but this is a chance to share your evidence of your stance. Again, going back to your personal story. This is what I did and it worked for me, or this is what I helped do for a friend or a family member of mine and it worked for them, and this is why I feel really strongly about it, because I watched the experience. Another topic of a conversation that may apply to is even like abortion conversation. That one's a little more emotionally heated, depending on where people are coming from, but it's one that you can talk about, hey, this is happening in XYZ, and this is why I feel strongly about it being legal in this manner, and things like that. So sharing the evidence of how you got there is pretty important as well, because again, it's tying all that together and giving more relevance to your conversation. Okay. Limit emotional triggers. Speaking of abortion, limit emotional triggers. Be mindful of the topics, particularly sensitive ones. Sometimes it's better to focus on less polarizing issues initially. I think this, I used abortion as an instance, but that's when I think after you've had a couple back and forths, you can maybe get into one of these conversations, or conversations that are similar to this that you feel like are a little harder to navigate. Another one that I know that me and my mom have personally had is around the trans community, which can also be a triggering conversation depending on who you are. So yeah, there's definitely conversations that are going to take a little bit of emotional toll. And if you know going in, especially early on when you're trying to open the door for these type of conversations, don't go head first into these, because it will not end well at all. Really start with something that is a little more neutral territory that you can go in, one that you feel really knowledgeable about, because I do think knowledge is power, and before you go into any of these conversations, come prepared. If it's something you already have planned, I really want to talk about to so-and-so about the Ukraine situation, Ukraine, Russia. I want to know that everything I'm going into this conversation with, I feel really confident about where I'm coming from and why I feel the way I do. So kind of go into these conversations prepared. Again, not ready to argue, but just ready to present your points and why you feel the way you do in a respectful way. But again, these types of topics, say for conversation 4, 5, 6 down the road, when you've built that relationship to the point that we have a mutual respect, and I think this is a time that we're ready to talk about a little harder conversation than we've been entering into. Follow up. So this kind of leads into having more conversations. We don't want to be a one and done. If we've created an environment where people are allowing us to talk to them about this, I actually know a couple people in this room that have been able to open the door to have these conversations and enter into those conversations that have been a little harder in the past for the purpose of saying, hey, why do you feel this way? How did you get there? So after the conversation, continue the dialogue over time. Again, this is about building relationships, help bridge divides, foster these ongoing discussions, and prioritizing understanding and respect. Dialogue across political bias can lead to more constructive and less divisive conversations. I know that a lot of people have created maybe neighborhood communities to have more conversations. Some people use things like book clubs. There are ways that you can even reach out into your small little corner of the world and create a space where these conversations, like maybe create an environment where you can do a coffee and chat, and you bring to the table up front like little conversation pieces that you want to discuss and say, hey, this week we're going to talk about, the economy. This week we're going to talk about, public education. This week we're going to talk about infrastructure, like whatever the case may be. Try to find a way to create an environment where you can have these conversations comfortably and openly, and also engage with the people you already have in your circle. Because I know probably everyone in this room has at least someone in their circle that has differing opinions on you, on different opinions from you on certain things that are happening right now, and you've avoided the conversation thus far. And I get it. A lot of people do that. It's hard to have those conversations and start them. But I will tell you, once you start having them, especially with these types of tactics, they will get easier and they will continue to happen time after time. And those people will seek you out eventually because they do like the fact that you don't share their opinions. People typically, I don't know if you remember, there's a time where people liked the fact that not everybody agreed with them. Right? I personally did. I don't like everybody just agreeing with me wholeheartedly. It's no fun. So, I mean, it's not. Not to be argumentative, but just the fact that we're not a monolith. I mean, even people that share the same political views are not a monolith. So it's the fact that when you find somebody that you respect and that you can disagree with respectfully, you will seek them out because you'll be like, I want to know what they thought. Did you hear about what just happened? What did you think of that? Like, this happens in real life, and this is something that used to happen more pre-social media. I don't know if y'all remember pre-social media, but that is what something happened. When something happened, you went and seek those people out, and you were like, hey, did you hear about this? What do you think? Like, this used to be common practice, and we need to bring that back. We need to bring back these conversations, these table conversations that have kind of gotten lost with social media and just the way we get information these days. That is, let's see. Okay, so this is kind of a follow-up to that, because not only are we having these conversations, but we need to know, depending on where you are, because I don't know everybody's political ideology in here, but where you land on certain issues or topics, you need to know how to adequately evaluate sources before you enter in these conversations, because that's another issue that we have right now. When information is super readily available, it all seems right to us. Especially if we're on a certain algorithm or a certain, we watch a certain media channel or we listen to a certain radio show, everything that comes out of that automatically seems truthful to us. And the reality is that both sides of the political fence, particularly in mainstream media, do not always show the full picture. And we kind of get left behind and we walk into conversations without any ammunition, shall we say. So this is basically kind of saying, how do we adequately evaluate sources and ensure that we're looking at issues with a non-biased lens before we enter into these conversations? So check the source. Look for a reputable, transparent, and up-to-date source and consider the source's origin. Who produced it? When was it published? I can tell you, when I first started on social media back in 2021, I initially entered the scene actually combating misinformation. That was my whole thing on the internet. I talked very little about the actual political element of it or policy, and talked a lot about how people were digesting information. And it was funny because I know there were several times where I would go into these channels such as Telegram and Parler, which was really great for my mental health. But I would go into these channels and I would get information to see what's the other side digesting? What are they reading? What are they getting? And many times when you start to trace back the authors of some of these articles or YouTubes, you'd find some really interesting and usually nefarious information about the author and originator of these pieces of information. And so when you can say, hey, I hear you, I know where you got this, and it was funny because even today, people will start to say something in a live, and I'll be like, and I'll finish telling them exactly what they're about to tell me, and it's completely fabricated, and they're like, how do you know that? And I'm like, because I researched everything that you listened to. And so when you enter that conversation, like that was my ammo. I already knew. One of my favorite ones is that we're a corporation, not a constitutional country. It's an interesting one. If you want to know about it, you can ask me later. But that was one that I would get a lot in these conversations, and they'd be like, how do you know about that? And I'm like, because I know where you got the information. So kind of seeing where it all originates is critical. Use the CRAP test. I like that. The test evaluates sources based on currency, relevancy, and accuracy. Check the content. For social media sources, look for the clues like the tone, the language, the format, and evidence, and consider if the content is current, relevant, and accurate, going back to your CRAP test. Check the source reviews. Look for endorsements and reviews of the source. Consider if the publisher itself is reputable. Is this someone that you have seen time and time again? We're looking at medical journalism or journalism coming out of the medical industry or the medical wheelhouse. Where's it coming from? Are these people that have notoriety and they've been published previously? Like, look at where these are coming from. Check the date. This is also really important when it comes to medical information, because a lot of new information when it comes to medical science, et cetera, it's always changing. That is an industry that is always changing, always updating. So seeing what they're looking at when you're having a conversation and being able to say, okay, yeah, I got that, I saw that. Have you seen the update since it happened? So really checking dates, valuable resource for information. Check for verifiability. Consider if the source information is supported by factual evidence, and look for citations, links to other sources. Right now, there's an issue where if something drops as breaking news, 6 media outlets will have the identical verbatim story. And it makes it really hard because a lot of people are like, I saw it 6 different places. You did, but they're identical, and they all just copy and pasted because they all want to be like, we have the news, we have the news, we have the news, look over here. So it's really about going and finding where did it originate, and I'll have some examples in a minute, but this is something that we need to pay close attention to, is when it's just a copy and paste over and over again, find out where the original source is, especially if it's talking about something related to the government, related to the medical industry, related to something that has a original source, whether it's like a legal document, et cetera, policy. Check for bias. That is very hard to do these days because unfortunately social media is built in such a way, especially if nowadays a lot of people, including myself, I'm guilty of this, get up and immediately scroll things like TikTok or Instagram. And that's where they start their day. And those social media websites are built in algorithms. So they see what you engage with, they see what you like, and that's what they show you. So eventually you get caught in this little echo chamber. So it's very hard to get away from bias when you're using these types of media, because they are creating bias that is going to keep you happy, keep you scrolling, and that's the intent of those things. So really being aware of bias, vague terms, loaded terms, that's the biggest thing. Looking for the way things are worded when you're reading or diving into any type of information. Check for errors. I've noticed this with really kind of derating, media or articles. It is just littered with horrible grammatic mistakes. It's a huge telltale sign that these are not being adequately vetted, they're not being adequately edited. That's a red flag. That's a red flag. If someone shows you a thing and it makes literal to no sense because of the grammatical errors, you say, let me find a different source that might be a little better than that. And then I have some examples. This is a video that almost got me, okay? Again, I'm on social media. And this was a claim that a Florida HOA president removed Harris signs and only left Trump signs up because they are historical since he was a previous president. And this particular video had 434,000 views, 49,000 plus likes, over 7,000 comments, and 1.9 thousand shares. There was a follow-up video by the same creator that said that the HOA president, when I watched that, I'm like, wait, that he triggered an underground explosive. I'm not kidding, this is real. That took off the HOA president's foot, and it got 2 million views, which is a lot. 199,000 likes, 9,500 comments, and 47,000 shares. Not only that, people reposted this video as audio with different images. This video was on YouTube. Like, this is just the sole views and shares and engagement from one social media channel without the other people copying and pasting this anywhere else. This is fabricated. There is nothing accurate about any of these stories. And I had people sending it, did you hear about this? And I'm like, yeah, it's not real. And if people took 5 seconds to go to this gentleman's page, they would see fully satirical sitcom 30-second posts. His entire content is to make sitcom-styled posts that are completely fabricated. And I figured this out because I Googled it, and I was like, let me go on Google and see if there's any, if this was real, there'd be some type of information around it. Couldn't find anything. Every single Google search led me back to either a X or Twitter video of him or him. That was it. There was no articles, no information, no local newspapers, nothing. So this is a prime example that he delivered this in such a intelligent, clear way. I mean, he sounded legitimate. And this is an issue that we're dealing with a lot of people in this country. When you seek out information on certain places, social media-wise, and that's your only source of information, these are very easy to fall for. Another interesting one, and I'm going to talk about it, is where did the term border czar come from? I mean, how many in this room have heard VP Harris be referred to as the border czar? Right? Okay. That originated from Governor Greg Abbott on April 15, 2021 in a press release. And then a few months later, in July this is currently. And then a few months later, I think it was June of 2021, it showed up again in a Republican Homeland Security briefing, kind of a presser similar to this. And then within weeks, every major media outlet picked this term up and started to call her that. And to the point now that we're 3 years later, and this is a very common talking point. Biden made her the border czar. Biden made her the border czar. No, she definitely got the name, but it wasn't from the Biden campaign. It was from a press release that got media attention, that caught on, and now it's become a common name that most people that are remotely politically engaged have heard at least once or twice in passing. And here's one on the other side of the fence. Youngkin got a lot of heat for signing a budget that affected the college tuition waiver program for disabled veterans and their family members. Here's the deal. Every Democrat signed that budget. So to blame Governor Youngkin for signing a budget that the Democrats handed him and said it's ready to go, not fair. And I had to call my own friends that are content creators that are also fellow Virginians that were sharing the posts. Youngkin did this. And I'm like, but did he? I mean, it had to get through the legislative body before it got on his desk. Many people were culpable in this, but at the end of the day, he took the heat. So while I'm not a fan of the governor myself, this is an incident where he was kind of thrown under the bus publicly and with the media, but clearly there were more people involved in the decision because a budget doesn't get finished into the finish line to get on his desk to be signed without other people taking a vote. So these are just kind of a couple of examples because I wanted to make sure I'm, again, staying, even. But it's the fact that, both sides, because we do have these extremes, we do have things going on constantly in the media. There's so much data to download every day, all day. It's really easy to kind of get lost in the sauce and not know what's fact and fiction sometimes. And taking those few moments to just do a quick search, find out where it originated from. I mean, sourcing is so important. It's something that, we try to teach our children. We try to, we see college trying to really focus on that. But as adults, sometimes we get further and further away from that because honestly, sometimes it takes too long. It takes time. And we live in a world that we want things done yesterday. I get that. I'm guilty of that. I grew up in no cell phone, no nothing, and now I couldn't imagine my life without it. So it's just the fact that we sometimes get away from ensuring that even our side of the fence and other side of it, like both sides of the fence, wherever we fall, are being conscious of what's being said and acknowledging it and addressing it and making sure that when we're delivering or talking to other people that we're coming in with, you know, all of our ducks in the row. You don't want to enter these conversations. Like, this is about having conversations, but it's also about going into them, you know, knowing that you're going into knowing I have all of the information that I feel necessary. And when you're in these conversations too, and you get in there and you're like, they start throwing stuff at you that you've never heard, and I've been in that situation, and you're kind of like, I don't know about that. That's okay to say, you know what? I'm going to look into that. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to go home. I'm going to spend some time on it, and I want to come back to this conversation and talk some more. Because again, that's showing this respect, this lending the olive branch. And so I think that's pretty important as well when it comes to these types of conversations. When you don't know something, don't pretend. Don't do that. It doesn't benefit anybody in the conversation. So if you're going into a conversation and you feel really confident, and then you get to this part where you're like, oh, they've given me some new information that I've never heard. That's okay. You take it, you write it down, you acknowledge that it's new information, you go learn about it, and then you come back into the table and have that conversation and finish it. So, questions and answers. I have a couple other slides if you want.